17. My eyes were just starting to get used to the dark. Backstage was a flurry of motion, even where visibility was low. Stagehands in black jumpsuits buzzed around us, their gloved hands flitting around our periphery, getting all the final details right. The technician waved a small wand over our inner ear monitors, our mics, and our motion trackers. The device trilled softly 3 times until it lit up green on the display. The technician nodded to himself and then pressed a finger to his headset. All devices connected to the network and are sending out readouts. All clear. He murmured to the engineer 100 feet above the stage, in the arena's crow nest. The engineer must have gotten the message because within moments, off to stage left, a small LED bloomed to life, counting down the seconds to the start of the show. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're listening to Tiger and the Viper. The dim screen began to pull up, and I could feel a testing squeeze ripple through our clasped hands. "We got this," Kat said, looking straight ahead as a slice of light began to grow.
"Places?"
A tiny voice chirped over our inner ear monitors from the crow's nest. My pulse skipped. It was all happening too fast. All of this furious activity around me made it hard to focus. The dark peeled back completely, like a rind, and we stood exposed to the sheer number of people gathered in the arena. As the dark began to slip away, any anonymity we might have had before this moment slipped away with it. We're pinned down by the bright hot flood of stage lights. The whine of drones swarmed around us, only partially drowned out by the dull roar of the dark writhing mass of the audience. I'd done public shows before, we all had as kids, but I was pretty sure that none of us had seen this many people here in one place. New Year's Holiday Ball was a music festival on performance-enhancing drugs. People camped out for this 2-day event all week just to see their favorite artists, and we'd been lucky enough to get in 6 months into our debut. If it wasn't for our label wanting to make good fast on our academy training expenses, we probably would have been moldering in the overseas festival circuit for years. We couldn't afford to mess this up. I blinked, overloaded and visually dazzled. Disorientation was natural, they told us in training, an animal reflex to become bedeviled in sudden bright light. You'll get used to it, they told us. People could get accustomed to so many uncomfortable things. I felt my heart start to beat against my ribcage, thumping blood steadily into the artery of my neck where I could feel it slamming against the skin. We didn't linger long at the back of the stage. We'd been trained for this moment, through exposure and repetition, the way horses were trained to take in blinders or hunting dogs to gunshots. Even the smartest animals in the animal kingdom needed to be trained out of fear. And right now, that training was being tested. 3 quick, deep breaths pulled straight into the diaphragm was how they taught us to center. I focused my sight to a point beyond the light, into the darkened crowd, beyond the white-hot blaze. It was impossible to make out anything in the swarming mass of the arena seating, the whole thing feeling like we were being swallowed by a creature of enormous size, with hundreds of thousands of undulating hands, all reaching towards the sky. I could feel Kat's fingers press into my palm gently. I hadn't caught that I was beginning to freak out until I felt the soft pressure bring me back. I turned to her, trying to subtly search her gray-green eyes. She let the corner of her mouth twitch upwards, not saying a word since she knew we were all hot-mic'd. Millions of people were tuned in tonight's festival broadcast, cameras trained on every tiny detail. "Give it up for Heartstopper!" The MC's voice boomed overhead, all around them. The girls and I raised our arms upwards towards the crowd, still linked together. We were supposed to let go a minute ago, but everyone was too scared to follow through. We were some no-name group on one of the most lucrative stages of the year. Performing to a crowd that had shown up for everyone but us felt like tilting at windmills. To our complete surprise, a roar lifted up from the crowd. I tried my best not to break into a disbelieving smile. Girl groups had some pre-debut followers and diehards from the start, but nothing to really write home about, or to help the groups break even. But here the crowd was responding, maybe caught up in the excitement in the last night of the event. The MC's voice boomed over the loudspeaker again.
"Folks, would you like to meet the members of Midas's brand new girl group?
The writhing crowd began to sound once more and took a moment to quell. The MC from up in his announcer booth waved for the crowd to settle down with the verve of a circus ringleader. A far larger, ghostly version of him was being projected just 10 feet up ahead to make the show easier to follow in the nosebleeds.
Girls, would you please introduce yourselves?
Kat gave my hand one last squeeze before letting it go. I only realized then just how sweaty my palm was as the cold rush of air came to take its place. I compensated by touching my fingers to the microphone at my ear to make sure it was still there, to make sure I was. Stepping into center stage, I stared straight ahead into the stage lights. I could just let go, I thought, of everything that had pulled me down before this moment. I could let the light blanch my doubts like forgotten bones on the desert ground. I could be anyone in the world that I wanted to be. So I drew a smile like a bow across my lips. Practice finally making perfect.
Hi, my name is Sunny. I'm the Mongnae of the group, and today's my 17th birthday.
Happy birthday, dear Sunny. A sugar-dusted Mont Blanc was shoved into my hands, stuck through with a dripping candle and a sparkler. Make a wish, Luna shouted from behind her terminal, waving her own sparkler. I leaned over the pastry, tucking my hair out of the way. I pursed my lips and inhaled the smell of chestnut puree and fresh cream. My eyes slid closed, thinking about how many birthdays I'd spent in the hospital or at work. Always work. I breathed them all out, all of the memories of the hard years. As the candle blew out, I made a promise instead of a wish. If there were harder years ahead, I wouldn't shy away from the pain, but face it head on. If I kept working hard and applying myself, maybe I could finally build my family better options. What was a few more years of selling your soul if it meant you got to make sure your parents retired comfortably? I remembered so many nights of Mom overnighting at the hospital, never farther than a few steps away from the edge of my bed. How she would rise in the morning with stiff joints and head wordlessly to work. How many times my father had woken me up before dawn, helped me put up my hair, got me into my costume. How he would hunch over the steering wheel, running on 2 hours of sleep and fresh off his night shift, just so I could be at the studio in time for my show. As the flame sputtered out, I wondered if I'd be able to pay back all that work before it was too late. I blinked a rogue tear out of my eye and looked back at Luna recording on her terminal. "What did you wish for?" she asked. I felt the practice smile slide into place when I caught sight of her terminal again. With my free hand, I made the shape of a heart with the thumb and a forefinger and held it above my own. For my birthday, I wish all of my fans to be happy and healthy. "Perfect, Sunny," a voice called over from my shoulder. The room broke out into activity, lights flickering back to their full brightness in the dance studio. Luna handed her terminal over to a production assistant who began to scrub through the video. The girls broke their small huddle and went to go grab their water canteens fresh off of practice for our upcoming show. "Sunny, great work on the birthday video." Producer called to me from behind their small holo display, reviewing the footage as it loaded onto his desk. "Just moving forward, remember that we need a bit more energy from you. You're supposed to fit this sweet and warm summer girl aesthetic. Right now, we're just getting a touch too pensive and sad." I paused, still bewildered and working through the fact that the entire team had staged my birthday for content. "No, for sure. I'm so sorry about that." I apologized, nodding. "We want fans to feel comfortable doing stuff with you, like shopping or a spontaneous date. Think fun childhood friend or a friendly classmate. We kind of want you to pivot back to that cheerfulness. Just give us relatable." I nodded slowly, like any sudden movements would send the producer into another round of stream of consciousness notes. "Got it. I'm so sorry about that. I'll make sure to be more mindful of that in the videos." He nodded as I spoke, barely listening. "Great, perfect, thanks." His attention disengaged immediately, drifting back to the portable holo display. I hadn't even gotten the words out before he was sliding the headphones back over his ears. Hands grabbed the Mont Blanc from my hands, shuttling the pastry into a patisserie box that it had come in, drifting away in the arms of an assistant. "Hey," I said, holding my hand aloft, surprised. "We'll bring it back, Miss Choi." They turned, looking exhausted and apologetic. "We just have a no-food policy in the dance studios." I turned to see Jerry's face pinch into a cloud of disapproval from across the room. I bit down briefly on the inside of my lip, rearranging my face into something more understanding. It wasn't like it was the PA's fault after all. They didn't need to deal with my disappointment. No, of course. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. I gave her a sheepish wave. That night, as we exited the studio, I downed the rest of my water bottle, reluctant to bring it back with me, on the van ride to the dorms. The empty bottle skittered into the trash and hit something cardboard, making a strange noise that caught my attention. When I looked inside, I saw the Mont Blanc sitting sideways in its pastry box, the whipped cream smeared across the little plastic window. My stomach dropped and I felt my mouth settled into a curdled frown. I don't know if it was about the pastry itself, the consistent hunger, or the fact that I was exhausted after practice, but I'd actually been looking forward to eating that Mont Blanc. I wanted it to be the one real point of enjoyment to the otherwise joyless spectacle they'd made my birthday out to be. I just wanted one thing that felt like it was actually for me. Then I remembered where I was, and the reminder snapped me swiftly back into that well-worn vigilance. I was at work right now. My eyes cast briefly across the rest of my bandmates, shuffling tiredly out of the dance studio. This place was cutthroat enough to encourage selling out a bandmate, especially if it got you somewhere with the label. One wrong look or someone encountering us in a less than perfect way could bring our time with the band to an end. We were all just spare parts, it felt like, to Midas. With my body working at diminished capacity seemingly most of the time, I didn't need to draw any more attention to myself, especially when I wasn't just doing this for me. Before anyone could see my face change, I felt it correct itself into a neutral position, smoothing out like wrinkled silk under pressure. I wasn't even cognizant anymore of all the adjustments, posture checks, and self-corrections I did all the time. They just kicked in, a reaction to unpleasant stimuli. On the outside, I realized it was easier to become like the frond of an anemone on the ocean floor, arcing and curling gracefully away into itself when it sensed danger. My mouth settled into a determined line, barely holding down my disappointment as I tried to punch it down. No cake on my birthday? Fuck it. I guess it could be a lot worse. Some of the kids in my neighborhood growing up only got cake when they got their first job, usually buying it themselves with their first paycheck. It was one of those first moments where you felt like you could chart the course of your own life. You just needed money to do it. I was making my own money now, and I suppose that meant that I could make it up to myself soon.
Hi, my name is Sunny. I'm the Hmong name of the group, and today's my 17th birthday.
I cringed, scrolling past the video as fast as it appeared on my feed. I was already in enough pain, watching an endless scroll sideways off the screen of my terminal, buried under a heavy set of blankets. Every joint felt inflamed today, like it was personal. Given that, I definitely didn't need to subject myself to any further footage of myself. It gave me a warm, nauseous pressure in my stomach. But that could have also been my uterus trying to kill me. Sunny, we're about to leave for practice. Hey, whoa! Ari stumbled into my room, shades completely drawn to protect against my recurring migraine. The sight of me piled under multiple blankets in my bed made her pause. Are you okay? I stared out at her balefully from underneath my fortress of blankets. No, I got my period last night. Arya leaned against the doorframe, her braids loose around her shoulders. She whistled mournfully. Wow, you got yours back? Lucky. How lucky is it if I'm in a world of pain right now? I groaned. Because it means then you really did gain weight, Arya snorted, pivoting on her heel to make a dramatic exit out the door. That's not how it works, I shouted after her after she left. I'll tell Jerry you're sick today, she called back. I tried to thank her, but she left mostly before I had the chance. I felt grateful for the brief glimpse of concern from her. Arya had never really been close to me. After 8 months of practice and dorming together, friendships and team relationships blossomed, just not with me. Somehow, even after all this time, it had drawn some of the girls like Arya and Luna together, but I still felt awkward crashing their late-night movie sessions or trips to the gym. Without really realizing how, I ended up once again as the girl who didn't quite fit. I slid back into bed, scrolling through the feed of my terminal, eyes glazing over muted footage from across the internet. My eyes followed the faces in those videos, tracing the pattern of their gaze, the tilt of their head, how tight or relaxed the muscles in their mouth seemed. Even though I liked watching people at a safe distance, I wasn't really good at making them feel comfortable. People felt complicated, full of exhausting expectations. It was hard to keep up with all those expectations, especially when most of them went unspoken. But based on all the recent experience, I knew that this distance was my fault. I just couldn't quite seem to pin down exactly what I was doing wrong. Which unpleasant faux pas or bad habit did I keep exhibiting that was consistently alienating people? What was it about me that people smelled in the water? The front door clicked shut, Arya being the last one to leave. Nothing but silence and an empty apartment remained. I tossed myself back against my pillow and stared up at the ceiling, trying to will the burgeoning migraine to go away. It was just too quiet here. I sighed. Fine. I rose out of bed decisively and tossed down a cap and a windbreaker. I might as well take advantage of some fresh air and movement if I couldn't quite get comfortable. That hopefully would distract me from some of the pain. Plus, it would be a good excuse to pick up tampons on the way back. Half these girls didn't even have their period anymore because of our weight, so the house had essentially run out due to lack of demand. I guess Jerry and the house managers had never thought to check in about restocking. That figured, I guess. I toed into my sneakers and readjusted my hair underneath my hat in the mirror. I looked at my bare face and wondered if I should also wear a mask, but after a few moments of searching for a spare, I laughed at myself. Who was going to recognize me in a state like this, let alone care? There were millions of people in Malibu. I was just one of them. I grabbed my key card off the entry table and headed out, pulling my hood over my baseball cap. The street was only a short elevator ride down, and within moments I was slipping out of the dormitory campus and into the faceless tide of people on the street. I felt my shoulders relax into the cacophony. If you slipped into the rhythm of the foot traffic, it simply swept you forward. Weaving through the crowd, I headed towards the pharmacy on the next corner. I tried my best not to look visibly pissed when I missed a line to cross, blocked by a stream of people coming down from the light rail. The weather was a wet kind of cold today, with an oversalinated smell blowing over the wall from the ocean. I shoved my hands into my pockets, trying to seek some small bit of comfort in the crush of people. I waited out what felt like an impossibly long red light, eager for the crossing sign to change, pushing down the returning pain in my abdomen. As I crossed the street, I thought back to what my mother used to serve when I didn't feel good. I thought back to sitting at the kitchen table, fingernails pricking into the thin nylon cover. When I was too sick or too exhausted to go to school, this is where I would sit. I was close to the small kitchen holo display where they ran reruns of old horse races. I was also close to Mom. It was easy to bring back the image of her back, and her pilled, washed-out, berry-colored sweater, her dark curly hair, and the smell of juk and ogopap on the stove. They used to taste so good on those hard days where my shifts as a child actor started to get longer, where we stumbled into the apartment late, ravenous but too tired to eat something complicated. I could feel my mouth water as I remembered my mom's beef rib stew, boiling hot on the stove and served with fresh cuts of scallion. I never quite waited when it came off the stove and always managed to burn the roof of my mouth, ladling scalding soup into my eager gullet. I swiped the nearest tampons from the feminine aisle, stomach grumbling with the now distant memory of Mom's fragrant galbitang. Weaving through the unhurried patrons of the pharmacy, I paid for my tampons and a singular bag of coffee-flavored candy. By the time it came to pay, my abdomen was back to the day's earlier antics, my insides actively trying to secede from my body. I ended up being so distracted that I forgot a bag, walking straight out of the store, tampons and bag of sweets shoved into the crick of my arm. It wasn't the most devastatingly graceful of Sunny, I suppose, but it was only a couple of blocks away from the dorms. I could crawl back under the covers when I got there, and hell, I could take another scalding hot shower for relief. As my hand reached out to press the crosswalk, I watched another hand slide out of my periphery to press the button. I didn't quite stop in time, colliding softly with her shoulder. The box of tampons dropped to the ground, with the bag of candy following it. Sorry, I stooped down to collect everything. No, that's fine, are you alright? An apologetic tone, and then a quick hand that scooped up and gave me back my recent purchases. I'm okay, I'm sorry about that. I turned to see a small teenage boy dressed in a work uniform for a fast food chain. I'd already caused a disturbance. I kicked myself as I took my box of tampons and candy back, mortified to be caught outside like this. His eyes met mine. I could only just make a hasty retreat at this point. I dropped my gaze and stepped sideways, making for the crosswalk. I was almost ready to take a sigh of relief before I saw his shoes falling in step with mine. Scuffed high-top shoes that used to be white, I guess, now a sort of dull, dingy yellow. "You having a bad day? I'm pretty good at lightening up the mood." I laughed at his gumption, figuring that I was about 5 years too old for him to be this informal. "Is that right?" I asked. "Try me." "I'm really not in the mood for all that right now." I made a brief gesture with my hand like I was waving away a gnat. "Come on, just give it a shot. Try me." He stepped in front of me, blocking the rest of the crosswalk. I peered to each side of him, wondering how appropriate it would be of me to just walk away in another direction. I hadn't been spotted or recognized yet, but this guy's weird persistence would definitely draw attention. I let out a small, frustrated breath, stopping. "What do you got for me?" The boy slipped something out of his pocket quicker than I could react. As I watched his hand pass in front of my face, I could see the item in his hands. It was a terminal, smaller and slimmer than any I'd seen on the local market. A small bead of light welled up on the surface of the smooth pebble-like plastic, and then flashed quickly, taking me off guard. "What the fuck was that?" I asked. "Dinner for the next 3 weeks," the boy said, looking down at the image saved on his terminal. "Thanks." He slipped into the crowd and I vaulted after him, chasing his red cap down the street, running until I ran out of breath. At the nearest train stop, I lost him, my head swimming. Suddenly, like a switch had been flipped, I began to notice the sheer amount of people around me. And I began to think about all those people that could be watching right now, recording, either out of sick fascination, curiosity, or, like this kid, for a quick buck. It began to dawn on me with a slow terror that getting out of the academy hadn't made us any more free. Quite the contrary, we'd just been taken from one small tank to a far larger one. They could call us artists all they wanted to on that programming. It didn't change the fact that we were still a spectacle behind aquarium glass. Monday evening found us with a rare chunk of free time. The girls and I trundled back home after practice and went our separate ways after lunch, with me settling down into my bed face down and falling into a half-hearted sleep. The teenage paparazzo's face kept swimming underneath my eyelids when I tried to slide them shut. He was a kid, just like me, likely from the same parts of the city that I was from. We worked on opposite sides of the same industry, trying to claw our way out of poverty. The only difference was that his payday meant an almost guaranteed news cycle about me, the band, that we didn't need. The photos, as tame as they were, would probably result in us getting a talking to by the label about meeting a certain expectation of decorum outside. In the exhaustion-ridden rest, I dreamed about my terminal ringing. When I picked it up, I could hear my father weeping on the other side. I kept calling to him. "Hey, what's wrong? Is that you? Dad?" The line clicked on the other end and went dead. When I woke up, my face was wet with tears and my heart was thundering in my chest. I rolled over and checked the time on my terminal, 23:07. I stared at the screen and thought about messaging my parents, checking in on them, but I realized I couldn't muster up the energy. Mom would inevitably quiz me on my performance, if I was pushing hard, and if I was staying on top of my weight goals. I didn't feel like telling her that I'd gotten gorilla photographed on the street with a box of tampons. Frankly, the whole thing just made me sort of angry. Not like any of these managers and producers cared about us having the right supplies here, or made an effort to stop the industry making content out of our most private moments. They didn't have to be on camera day in and day out. We were getting scrutinized within an inch of our lives online every day, and we hadn't even hit our first year as a group yet. Sighing, I put my terminal down and got up to use the restroom. On the way back, I saw the door ajar to Aria's room. Inside, Aria and Luna were furiously tapping away at their handheld holo displays, tilting sideways as they raced their in-game avatars to the finish line. Luna crossed the finish line and tossed her holo display onto the bed, jumping up and down while Aria hid her shame in her blanket. "That's the third game," Luna said. Aria groaned from under her blanket. "You just got lucky." "3 times? I got lucky 3 times?" Luna howled with laughter. Aria tore her blanket off her head and began to cackle alongside Luna, leaning backwards with mirth. I felt the creeping sensation of overstaying my welcome crawl up my spine, watching the girls laugh the evening away. I forced my body into action numbly to leave them to their fun. As I slunk away quietly to my room, I shuffled through some of my own memories as a girl. I don't think I'd ever felt the pure abandon of a thoughtless laughter like these girls did. Not with another person. These girls felt way more comfortable with one another to be their most imperfect selves, to be stupid and loud and bad at something without the fear built in automatically. Maybe the worst part of it was that after all this time together, they felt more comfortable together in their free moments. Something that somehow felt like proof. Even after all this time in training, I was still lagging behind in getting to know them. Even though it was stupid, I realized with a sinking feeling that I didn't think I'd ever gotten an invite to play video games together in the evenings. I guess I couldn't really blame them. Most nights after training and shows, I was slinking back to my room, exhausted from the effort and the social interactions, trying to be the perfect version of the character the label had handed me. I doubted that made me very good for a game partner during their decompression time. I guess I should have called that by now. I had a habit of falling just short of everyone's expectations. I bit back a sharp breath, heading back to my room and locking my door. Maybe some sleep would fix things. There was no time like now to test that theory. I laid down on my bed, trying to close my sore, tired eyes. It proved to be surprisingly hard. I tried a few more times before simply staring upwards at the shadowed patterns in the pockmarked ceiling. In the academy, pushing forward was the only thing I could do. The path forward was clear, segmented with goals and clear-cut expectations. Now, things seemed a bit less clear. I'd made it. We were all working hard to ensure the success of our new group. Things were supposed to be good. The thing was, all of it seemed inconsequential. What precise, inscrutable element made our group more resilient to capricious whims of an audience, more than another one? No one could guess how long we'd be successful and relevant. Only the consumer and the powers that be could really decide that. And none of us really understood how any of those powers worked. I wondered again if I was really capable of erasing my parents' debt for having me. It was the last thought I could focus on before sleep took me. Sleep dropped me off at a strange, unexpected station between 2 and 3 a.m. Sweaty and disoriented, I woke up with hair plastered to my neck and face, still in bed in yesterday's hoodie and sweats. I sat on the side of my bed, groggy, reaching for a new pair of shorts and sleep shirt. I could still feel my chest constricting, but I couldn't tell if it was my medication wearing off or the aftershocks of another nightmare I couldn't quite remember. I pulled the fresh shirt over my head and tiptoed out of my room for a new bottle of water. With the bottle retrieved, I trudged back upstairs, body heavy. The hallway was dark, my eyes just getting used to the curtain of gloom. Then I noticed a slice of light at the end of the hallway, the emergency exit that led out to a fire escape. The door propped open with a book. It made me wonder if someone was still outside or had just forgotten to close the door after themselves. When I stared through the gap, I felt the draft first and smelled cigarettes after. The smell reminded me of my dad, and those morning rides down the highway, windows rolled down and doing 60. Frigid air hitting my little body in the back seat as my dad drove me to work sucking down a cigarette. There was something about that first puff I remembered that smelled so much better than the rest. My eyes blurred, remember the bokeh pattern of the highway lights and the smell of the cold dawn air, ethanol, and cigarette smoke. The moment that the sky's colors became muddied, night blending out into morning. I remember being strapped into the back seat, bundled up in a windbreaker in my galoshes, trying to wake up before the sun came up over the ocean. I made a short pass over the back of my neck to remember where I was. The feeling of my palm on the nape of my neck brought me back to the present. I looked down at the book, holding the door open, studying the battered linen spine. Most of the gilded text had been rubbed away, but I could still make out the words, Morale de l'ambiguïté. I shrugged, stepping over the book, ducking into the emergency exit. I made my way up to the roof, and the slanted roof landing led out into a concrete walkway surrounded by stone-gray gravel. The overgrown shrubs provided a natural cover against the outside interference past the property line, but they also seemed to provide a lack of lighting on the westernmost wing of the dorm. Sitting in the alcove underneath a bricked-over window was Kat, staring off into the distance with a cigarette perched on her lower lip. The smoke that clung around her smelled smoky and sweet, like herbs and a dark, jammy cherry. It made my mouth water slightly, licking my sleep-chapped lips. The low illumination from the sconce light sat pooled in the noble sweep of her nose and the full curve of her cupid's bow. In her eyes sat the same disengaged, faraway look, like she was dwelling on a memory that held on to her more firmly than the present. I approached slowly to keep from startling her, but Kat didn't seem to react when she saw me in her periphery. "I didn't think anyone was still up," she said, glancing at me calmly over her shoulder. "Aren't you cold out here? It's windy tonight." I hovered a few feet away from her perch, unsure how welcome my company was. It was a question I asked myself often. Kat shook her head, tucking her knees up, hugging her legs to her chest. "Not when you get used to the fresh air." She patted the concrete next to her. I drifted over and sat down, looking around nervously. "You're not afraid of getting caught on camera smoking?" I asked, tucking my cold fingers under my arms. "You haven't noticed yet?" I blinked at her, following her gaze at our surroundings. It occurred to me then why this was the perfect smoking hideout. The roof and this wing of the building had been under renovation for quite some time. Because no ground floor or windows existed in that portion of the wing, and the window above had been bricked over, it seemed like the label had just decided to skimp a little on the security camera perimeter. Better yet, the groundskeeping team had not been to the back of the building in quite some time. Because of this, the overgrown cypress trees towered against the back of the building, shielding it from the view of the noisy freeway beyond. In many ways, sitting here with Kat felt like I'd stumbled into a secret hideout in the middle of the night. I studied her face in the moonlight, trying to determine if I was dreaming or not. Something about this felt surreal, and there really didn't seem to be any cameras in sight. My body softened for a moment, shielded from the feeling of being perceived for a merciful handful of moments. Kat's enormous gray-green eyes took me in, an unreadable smile sitting in the pocket of her dimpled cheek. She passed her tongue over her bottom lip to catch a stray bit of unrolled tobacco, handing me the cigarette. It sat perched between her fingers in the middle distance between us. "I don't know. I don't think we should be smoking." A feeling of discomfort rolled through my shoulders. Kat laughed, her full lips stretching back to frame an almost too charming smile. "You can do whatever you want, provided they don't catch you breaking the rules." I tilted my head sideways to rebut her, but it paused instead. Then why would they put so much effort into enforcing any of these rules? To punish the people who get caught, make an example of them to keep everyone else in line. She gave me an apologetic smile. "Sorry, doll. You have to stop being such an idealist." I laughed, immediately clamping my hand over my mouth so I didn't get caught. "That doesn't really feel fair," I said after a moment. She leaned against my shoulder, sighing. "Yeah, we break our backs to follow all these rules to the letter, while the label execs spend more time in a casino than a boardroom, breaking every law imaginable. Don't let these restraint-challenged toddlers dictate what kind of fun you're allowed to have here." She pushed her hair out of her face, tying it into a ponytail. The look Kat sent me over her shoulder was mischievous, the corner of her mouth curling into something unspoken. A scrappy challenge, like two girls on a playground making promises over a spit handshake or a double dog dare. My stomach did a strange flip, the kind that silently wondered if I was brave enough to have her type of fun. I got lost in her dark pupils, wondering if this thundering in my heart was the first thrill of what friendship felt like. I plucked the cigarette out of her fingers decisively, admiring the neatly rolled quality of it. Most people bought factory-made cigarettes now or plugged away at multi-chamber vapes. It took extra time and intention to roll them yourself. I smiled when I realized Kat's rolling papers had strawberries on them. There was something indelibly human about rolling and sharing your cigarette with someone. I pulled in the fragrant smoke pouring from the filter, letting the velvet feeling enter my chest. It tasted awful. The tobacco mixture didn't taste the way that it smelled. It was acrid, with a small lick of cherry at the end, hitting the back of my dry throat and making me gag. Tears roiled out of my red eyes as I tried to quietly ride out the coughing fit into the collar of my hoodie. My lungs burned, the tears never ending as they streamed down my hot cheeks. I'd never felt so immediately humbled and regretful of a choice in my life. The entire time Kat was shaking in quiet laughter, shushing me as she ran a soothing hand over my back. Tears were also streaming down her face, her eyes squeezing together as if continuing to see me cough would make her lose it all over again. Why did you take such a big puff? She asked through hiccups, blinking back through the tears with her long doe lashes. I don't know. I have no idea what I'm doing. I threw up my hands and let them drop, staring at her with baleful red eyes and streaming mascara. She paused and took me in before descending into helpless laughter. I stared at her for a moment, wondering if she was making fun of me. I guess we have that in common. Kat took a big gulp of air, pursing her lips in a quizzical way. I'm gonna take that cigarette back now, if that's okay. I jumped, looking back down at the cigarette in my hand, handing it back to her. Yeah, of course. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna get going, actually. Give you back your space. I felt the back of my neck reddening, as if I'd somehow immediately blown it as soon as I'd started. Scrambling up, I tried to stand, finding something holding me back around my wrist. I looked back down, seeing Kat's graceful fingers locked around it. She didn't look at me as she finished her cigarette, just simply murmured, "Stay," as she exhaled another perfumed plume of smoke. I followed her gaze as I sat back down to the silvery sphere of the moon, dancing behind the fast-moving, lacy clouds. Her fingers loosened from my wrists, and I could feel her hand slip into mine, making my heart start to beat fast and harsh slugs against my ribcage. Kat leaned over and put her head back on my shoulder, nursing the rest of her cigarette as we watched the moon play peekaboo with the clouds. I didn't know what to do next, so I cradled her hand in mine, like I was holding on to something precious. And for the next stretch of time, as Kat rested her head against my shoulder and her warm hands sat in mine, things were more perfect than they'd ever been. Thanks for listening. If you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, please shoot us a like or a comment about the episode and make sure to hit follow to be notified when new episodes come out. Supporting this way is free and helps get our podcasts out there. If you're hearing this on Spotify, make sure to rate our podcast so we can find other great listeners like you. If you'd like to support what we do here, you can become a patron and receive early access episodes before they're aired, view high-resolution chapter art, and be part of our small but growing community. A huge thank you, as always, goes out to my patrons Cheyenne Summers, Chase Wassenaar, and Jeff Bala. Thanks for tuning in.